ideas, and welcome back to something slightly unexpected. Welcome back to another appendix to the Ages of Chaos. It just keeps going, doesn't it? It is like chaos itself. It is eternal. As long as Games Workshop keeps this golden age of chaos going, or should that be the black age of chaos, or the red age, in fact, who knows? I will keep doing these reviews, and they keep doing it. Chaos is in a beautiful place right now. In fact, I would, as I've said before, I'm sure, I would argue that chaos across the board in every gaming system is in the perfect place. It's in, at least it's in the place that is the very best state it has ever been. The very best state it has ever been. There is so much you can do now. There is so much you can do with the various codices, the army books, the battle tomes, the additional army lists, the detachments, the add-ons, all of that stuff all thrown together. You can create the most interesting themed narrative armies you can possibly think of, and that has been enhanced to the nth degree in Warhammer 40,000 recently with the introduction of something that is simultaneously kind of surprising and unexpected, which is the introduction of Codex Chaos Knights. Now, this is something that players have been hankering for the longest time. The Chaos Knights, and the Chaos Titans indeed, have really been part of Chaos for a long, long time. They've been part of the background for ages. I mean, things like the Legio Mortis, for example, one of the big houses of Titans who fell, one of the big Titan Legios who fell during the Horus Heresy. They're a key part of the background. They've been associated with the background of Chaos for the longest time, but have never really made an appearance in the gaming system itself. The Knights, who are sort of like... The Knight households are slightly different. That's Rufus, by the way. That's my cat Rufus, who's being a pest, a pain in the arse, because it's raining outside and she can't go out. Can you, little shit? Anyway, additional commentary by Rufus there. The knightly households are like... They are smaller titans. The titans themselves are just gigantic war engines that need multiple crews to function, and are like walking skyscrapers of destruction, essentially. And as you'd expect, those that fall to chaos are incredibly corrupted, demon-infused, warp-altered, mutated things that are often insane and rampage across the battlefield. The Knights are slightly different. What I like about the Knights, the introduction of the Knights, is A, it allows for a scale of Titan that is workable in an army, in a normal army in Warhammer 40,000, and B, it's a little bit more narratively themed, because the Knight households are exactly what it says on the tin. They have, despite the fact that they ride these giant engines of destruction, these giant humanoid engines of destruction, the knightly households have this slightly Arthurian crusading knight quality about them. That's how their ethos is maintained. That's what their cultures are like. And I mean, there are divisions, because of course the knightly households are all different. They all derive from different worlds, from different traditions. They all come from different crashed spacecraft from the ancient days, long before there were even space marines or anything like that, before the Emperor embarked on his Great Crusade. They are actually from the golden age of humanity, from the age of technology. That's where they're from, when humanity expanded out across the stars. And of course, there has to be knightly households that fell to chaos. Of course there has to be. Now, up until this point, the Chaos Knights have just been an index list. They've kind of been a get-you-by list. And to be honest, they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them, but they were a bit boring. They were just the Imperial Knights slightly copied and pasted over to Chaos with a few different keywords and slightly different aesthetics and some minor weapons options that were slightly different, because of course the restrictions that the Imperial knightly households operate under don't make much sense when translated over to Chaos. But they've actually, with this codex, it's a small codex, but they've gone out of their ways to make them distinct. They are now, as you'd expect from the current era of Games Workshop, really bloody interesting. They've gone into extreme depth looking at how a knight can become corrupted, because of course you have to bear in mind their whole ethos is loyalty and nobility, so that's rather difficult to corrupt. So what they've done, rather than just going down the route, oh, they're warp corrupted and it sends them mad, and so they're just lunatics, they're just gigantic lunatics in giant mutated war engines. You do have that element here, there is that aspect of them, but like with the Chaos Space Marines in recent editions, they've gone very deep in trying to explore how and why knights can become not even corrupted, but why they would turn from their own oaths of loyalty, or even how the oaths of loyalty themselves can become the key to their corruption. So you have knightly households, for example, that were keyed, that were actually they were sworn to particular Space Marine legions during the Great Crusade. Their entire philosophy and ethos, everything about them, their culture, was about serving particular Space Marine legions and certain Primarchs. And as a result of that, they were basically slaved to those legions and Primarchs. They had the notion that the Space Marine legions could turn on the Imperium was just an anathema. It was unthinkable. So you have knightly households that were tainted and turned against the Imperium, not because they were selfish or because they were insane or because they were corrupt, but because they were so totally loyal, because they had no choice in the matter. They fell with their legions. They fell with the legions that they served. You know, they actually fell out of their own nobility and slowly and surely became corrupted as time went on. I really, really like that. I think that's really cool. You also have something about the mechanisms of the knights. I mean, one thing I really love about Titans and Knights, and it's something I've always really enjoyed, is they're not just war engines. They're not just giant machines. The pilots of the Knights and of Titans link into them. They're surgically and mechanically altered. They're cybernetically enhanced, so they have all of these ports and nodes that by which the Titans can link into them. They have these command thrones in the heads of the Titans that allow them to bond with the machine on a sort of psychic and spiritual level. So when they plug in, they're not just riding the engine, they're not just dominating the engine and urging it forward or to fire, they are communicating with it. The Knight engines have machine spirits, just like all machines do in the Imperium, i.e. they have artificial intelligences. And over time, those intelligences can become corrupted, they can become tainted, they can become just flawed. They can develop flaws and tics based on their obsessions or based on the battlefield conditions to which they're subjected. And that has the effect of then perhaps tainting and corrupting the minds and souls of the pilots, or vice versa. Because another thing that happens is the psyche is sort of like the psychic engrams of all the previous pilots, so the Knight's ancestors are absorbed into the machine. They're actually absorbed into the engine. So when a knight links in when a knight's pilot links in to their command throne, they're actually communicating on a psychic level with the personalities and the engrams and sort of the phantoms, the ghosts of their ancestors. I mean, that's fucking cool, isn't it? That's a brilliant idea. And sadly, sometimes, because of what those ancestors were subjected to, or because of what they've experienced, or because of what's happening within the Knight systems, maybe there's some sort of flaw in the Knight systems, they become tainted, they become corrupted, and they become the source of the madness that sets in. It's phenomenally cool. Another interesting thing you get in this book, some of the Knight households were never part of the Imperium to begin with. They're so far flung and sort of thrown out from the remit of the Imperium that they were never retaken during the Great Crusade. So much later on, long after the Horus Heresy, Imperial explorators and ambassadors have fallen on worlds where there are knightly households to be met with violence and resistance, because the knightly households have developed over the millennia, have developed their own cultures and their own belief systems. Many of them have come to worship either their ancestors, some perversion of what they believe humanity and the Emperor to be, or even some aspect of the Chaos powers in some sort of pagan form, or some sort of pantheistic form. So there's that as well. There's a lot going on here, psychologically and in terms of background. Another thing they've done, which I never expected them to do, and I'm so happy they did it, it's emblematic of the way they're working with the armies. They really want you to be able to tailor these armies the way you want them. They want you to make them into narrative exercises and into modelling exercises. And the possibility, the potential here with the knightly households is just insane, because there's not just one type of knight. There are actually lots of different types, and they're roughly subdivided into three. So you've got the infernal houses, and the infernal houses are kind of what I would go for. They are your classic Chaos Knight. So these are the ones that have been maybe taken by the Dark Mechanicum and have been subjected to all sorts of hideous rituals and corrupting scrap code. They've been possessed by demons, so they've become something else. The knights in there, the pilots in the knights' skulls have become sort of mutated and fused with the engine, so they can never leave it. They become insane. They become demon infested. The actual knights themselves don't even look like knights anymore. They're sprouting flesh and spines and tusks and teeth and horns and all sorts of shit all over the place. They're the classic Chaos Knights. I like them very, very much. But weighed against them, you've got the iconoclast households, and the iconoclast households are slightly different. They can be warp corrupted, they can be tainted in a similar way, but they've got more of their own personality about them. They're more like the Undivided Legions, sort of like the Alpha Legion and the Black Legion and the Night Lords in the Chaos Space Marine Legions. They've got their own agendas. They still retain their own personalities, their own drives, and their own motivations for the most part. Yeah, they might be insane, they might be mad, they might have been tainted by the warp or whatever, but they still retain a little bit of it, and they often fell out of some flaw or some revelation that they had or something to that effect. The pilots are still the pilots. They're still very much themselves in an iconoclast household, and they still hold true to sort of a tainted or corrupted version of their old family structure. That's really cool. That leaves a lot, and I mean a lot, of space for customization. And then you have the Dreadblades, and the Dreadblades aren't a household. They're not like an entire house of knights. They are individual knights that have their own sort of mythologies. They've broken away, basically. They're renegades. They don't have a household to belong to. So they have become their own legends through whatever means. And there's a lot here. It actually gives you several examples of how an iconoclast household can function, how a Dreadblade can function, and how an infernal house can function. And they're all remarkably different from one another. Not only that, they have their own rules. They have their own rules, and they have their own items and artifacts, and they have their own stratagems. It's sublimely cool. I can see not only creating a household to go with some of my Chaos Space Marine armies, but making households in and of themselves. Another thing that's really fun about this army is you don't need many miniatures. I mean, that's a real cool thing about this. They're big and expensive miniatures, but you only need like 3 to make an army. So it's actually very economical in that regard, not only in terms of money, but in terms of time. You can spend a lot of time on each miniature, making it individual, making it distinct. You can spend a lot of time creating your heraldry, your imagery, your icons, developing the background of your fallen knightly household. There's a lot of potential here. And when you start combining them with the Chaos Space Marines, the demons, and all of that stuff, you can create some really amazing, fun, unique armies here. It's honestly, the scope to create armies now is almost too big. It's almost so big that you need to focus down a little bit. It's a very, very good book. It functions very well. The army list is really good, as you'd expect from Games Workshop at the moment. There's a lot of potential for customization and for very interesting abilities going on here. And also, they are to make them very distinct from their Imperial counterparts, which is something that I can only commend. I think it's really cool what Games Workshop have done here. It's a very, very good codex, and if you're a Chaos player, there's nothing, it's a fantastic example of how Games Workshop are thinking and how they're regarding Chaos now. Chaos is of an equal footing to the Imperium now, and that's very clear. It's wonderful, and it suggests things that might happen down the line. That's what I really like. I think it's fair to say, given certain recent developments, that it's entirely possible, in fact even likely, that we'll have a Dark Mechanicum book before long, possibly within the year, maybe over the next couple of years. I think a Dark Mechanicum book is almost certain at this point, that will incorporate, or at least allow for the incorporation of lots of different elements. What with miniatures like the Lord Discordant out now, the new Obliterators, the Chaos Knights, it would be a foolish waste of potential not to do it. So when anything else occurs, I will be back, ladies and gents. So until then, bye-bye!